Hey community, before we get into this new month, which will be fully under the light of Matrescence, we wanted to let you know that during the summer, we reached two goals that Eva and I had set for ourselves for this podcast. We surpassed the 500 followers on all the podcast platforms combined and over 10,000 downloads of our episodes. I mean, this is pretty amazing. And this is where you can come in again to help us out. We have high hopes for the rest of the year and we want to hit 1,000 followers and 15,000 downloads by the end of the year. This means we have 4 full months left on our hands to achieve this goal. And how can you support us? You can help us by sharing your favorite episodes with your community, making sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram under Damn Parenting Podcast, and make sure that you give us a rating on any podcast platform that you subscribe. Make sure that the word is spread within your community. And if you have enjoyed any of the topics we've covered in over our 100 episodes, go and hit the 5-star rating and comment if you can. Get on YouTube and hit the subscribe button and share. Make sure that we get into the conversation of your WhatsApp groups, your Facebook groups, the events that you're at, or with any casual conversation you're having with another parent. Thank you so much for all the support that you've given us so far. And we aim to continue our mission on shedding light on the Dutch medical system, a parenting journey we all go through, talking about the hidden awkward topics many refuse to do, and give voice to our community so you know where you can get information and helpful tips. Thank you so much for your support, and let's jump right into the next helpful episode.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Damn Parenting, your English-speaking parenting podcast from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. As always, we are your hosts, Eva and
Maren.
And today we are delighted to be kicking off our September month, which is full of Matrescence topics. And of course, being the first Monday of the month, we have the wonderful Elizabeth from Good Writes and Reads with us. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello.
Hello. So this is, I think, a kind of a passion project that has grown with myself and Maren in the last 6 months or so, or even starting this podcast, actually, because in essence, the podcast comes from our journey into this. What do you think?
Yes, but the first time I became aware of what was going on was when Elena dropped the magical word of matrescence, and then just everything like kind of clicked into place. Because we started this project with out of the intention, okay, we're going through something, we want to share this, but we also want to make it easier for the people coming after us or for the people along the ride so they don't have to go through all this stuff. So at least I never had this wording for myself, the thing that we were going through, until I had the word. I knew then, okay, this is what I can stick to. This is how I can relate to it. This is how I can research it. And then my whole obsession with Matrescence, was sparked. And here we are. We thought, let's dedicate a whole month to it, because up to this day, not everyone knows what's going on. And I'm sure that not every one of the listeners is super familiar with the term or what it means, the process of becoming a mother. And so we thought, let's dedicate a whole month to this, tackle it from all the angles that we think are important. What better way to start with a book about this very topic?
And I want to say that actually Eva was the first person who used the word to me, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. Like, what is matrescence? So it just goes to show it really is not something people are familiar with at all,
Very typical for us females. Like, I mean, this is what the book really gets into at the essence of it. So previously last month, if you listen to episode 3, where we had Danielle Siegel, the whole brain child, we kind of broke it up into parts. And as Elizabeth's the librarian, the writer, she kind of knows how to guide these book clubs. So we were just discussing before starting this topic, how are we going to do it? Like, how are we going to break this down? And Elizabeth, how did you recommend doing this book club, as it would be?
Yeah, so for this one, I was saying that I think we're going to treat it more like a traditional casual book club. And I'm going to give us a little bit of a summary, and then we're just going to go into some questions and we're going to discuss it. So for you readers out there too, hopefully you enjoy the discussion. But if there's questions that don't get asked, put them in whatever chat form and we'll try to answer them. So I'll jump in, start us off. So we're reading Matrescence by Lucy Jones, and the subtitle is On the Metamorphosis of Pregnancy, Childbirth, and Motherhood. And the author is an English journalist who usually writes about science, health, and ecology. biology. And so I thought that that was very present in this book. She's definitely using that background in writing this book, because each chapter opens with a juxtaposition with the natural world, from a description of a caterpillar's metamorphosis into a butterfly to a zombie parasite that takes over an insect's brain. So she has these just throughout the book. It's very well written. It's very artistic. So there's also poems and quotes that open a lot of the chapters. And just to give us a taste, I'm going to read one little one from the beginning. So this is page 86 of my copy. She wrote to end a chapter. Back at home with our daughter, just 1 day old, our flat felt different, as if I'd stepped through a portal into a parallel universe or onto the set of a film. In my arms, a collection of trillions of atoms had cycled through generations of ancient supernova explosions. We were both so old, made from stars born billions of years ago. We were both so new, she breathing outside me, I being made again in matrescence. I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't sleep for the beauty of her. Little pink mouth, dough ball cheeks, plant stock soft bones, her astral holiness, body of my body, flesh of my flesh, an expansion of the universe bouncing into existence, new galaxies, axons, dendrites, cells and love, cells and love. So the whole book is not written like that. It is very journalistic. She interviews people. She talks about her own experiences becoming a mother, but she also shapes the chapters with these really beautiful sections at the beginning and the end that I thought made it a really lovely book to read. And then it's a lot of her personal experience as a mother. And so that's kind of what we started talking about. So we kind of got into about our takeaway on that aspect of it, which my thought on, I think the author had a lot of depression. I think really bad postnatal experience with depression, because to me, it felt like every chapter came back to the mother's mental health. And that is not necessarily everyone's experience. So maybe Maren, you can give some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm obsessed with this book. I love this book. I think it's so important. I will give this to everyone, comma, and I will add two things to that, which is, first of all, she's living in the UK. So it is written from a experience in the UK society, in that country, with the setup that is there, which is very different from where we are in the Netherlands or wherever you are listening to this. You will have your own cultural lens on that. So this is one thing that I will add to that. And the other thing is that I personally think she is on the very end of the scale. Her experience, which was to me felt very extreme reading it, because my experience wasn't even close to some of the very extreme aspects of hers. At the same time, I think it is very important to read those so everyone can relate, because at parts I felt she's putting the most extreme version of this out there, so everyone either going through this same extreme situation, which is possible, but also the people who are not can understand, oh, okay, I see where she's coming from. I've had this in a milder form. I've had this in another version. So I still think it is important to, write the brutality and the extreme heaviness of things out. But I also want to recommend this with caution. Someone reading this with not having had their own experience to fall into, to put this into perspective, that this is not the baseline. So this is not the middle of the scale, but her experience in some chapters and in some aspects are really on the far end of the spectrum. So this would be my comment on the overall experience of this book, that if you haven't have your own experience to rely back to or put this into context, then know that this is not the baseline. And that's what I would say.
You were kind of on the other end of the spectrum a little bit.
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts on that?
So myself and Maren had actually kind of spoken a couple of days ago, and both of us were like, yes, we would definitely give this to pregnant people. And like, as Maren said, there's a caveat for her. Right. Yeah. And for me, it's a case of, but it's also a reality check that this is a window I want you to see and I want you to be aware of, because, knowledge is power. And the fact is, if this happens to you, this can happen to you. This could happen to you. This could happen to another person. Give them the language, give them the knowledge of this. And that's, I think, what this book is about. Lucy goes into like facts and statistics that we're all very aware of death and mortality in pregnancy and in birth and, you know, for the mother. And that's related to the care and everything else it's related to, because there's obviously not enough research and there's not enough focus on it. And one point that she did say was, you know, if there was no racism, if there was no socioeconomic differences between people or whatever, we wouldn't be experiencing these mortality rates. And the thing for me was, it was just the whole thing of, it's just giving you this window. And so, yes, as Maren said, this could be an extreme as a word, but for me, it was also, she was using certain words and languages and wrote down sentences and quoted things that I was like, oh, like for the first time, I felt like, yeah, that's how I felt. And so I kind of was like, yes, this is speaking to me. So some things mightn't speak to Maren, but some things spoke to me, because every single pregnancy, every single birth, and every single motherhood experiences, you know, they're all going to be unique. And so I definitely would gift this book out to anyone specifically pregnant, so you have time to read the book. Because there was certain words I was like having to translate, because I was like, wait, what is this? Because she quoted from some older books that I was like, I don't even know what this word is or how to pronounce it. But yeah, I just, I wouldn't say a caution, but I would say here is a really open book of an honest and raw experience. And yeah, I wouldn't put a caveat on it. It's just a case of, here it is, you know, just read it and take it for what it is. And if you're lucky, you will not have any of this.
Yeah, exactly. Because I actually had 2 pregnant people in my life while I was reading it. So I was thinking, like, I was like, oh, I got to give this to them. And then I was like, ooh, but is it going to scare them? Like, and so I do think being gifted or told to read, people should read it. It is a good time to read it at pregnancy, because then you're not too busy. But you need to definitely have that caveat, which is, so my first question that I was going to ask us was like, what was your major takeaway? Like one thing that you would think kind of summed up this book. And I would say, to add to what we're talking about already, like mine was, she points out that just learning the word matrescence, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, because, you know, the new word for us, that just knowing what it is and its definition, that it's the act of becoming a mother, right? In all forms, all physical, mental, spiritually, that just learning that reduced women's mental health postpartum. Just having that language of, this is a major transition and your body and your mind and everything is going through changes. Plus you now have this new baby that you have to deal with on top of it. Just having that made people feel better. Just knowing that. And so that's where I come back to why I want more women before they have the baby to read it, even if it is a little bit scary, is because if just that figure, just knowing that word can make you feel better, because you know, wow, like I am going through a major life transition. I need to be more compassionate to myself, more, you know, whatever can make you feel better, then it's worth having this book and knowing what it is. So that was my major, if I had to sum up and take away. But for you guys, what was like something that just kept coming up for you?
I really enjoyed the science background that she put in. So always the little openers from her other writings, which I really enjoyed. And at the same time made me so furious reading about all the things that we know about nature, that we know about the universe, that we know. Someone spent, I think she's quoting some thing about eels, how they 30 years, 20 years later come back. And I'm like, okay, great. So someone took the time to observe fish for 20 years, but here we are sitting and no one fucking cares about the female body and there's no studies around that. So that was a major takeaway. Like, glad that we know everything about the universe and how black holes are built and how all these atoms are floating around. But can we talk about the hormonal shift that mothers go through in pregnancy? What? Hormonal shift? What's happening? So that was a little, a gentle reminder of the way that we still have to go. And at the same time, what I really enjoyed also, her scientific research that she puts in, the latest research that is finally being done in its child shoes and hopefully progressing more and more. And so that was really, so she quotes even a study from 2023. So it's really like on top of the research that's happening right now, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, just my major takeaway, like you said, having the language, having the understanding, and just taking this guilt and shame away that I am failing at this and I am not good enough and why is this so horrible, and knowing that the process of becoming a mother is not an individual problem.
And one of the things that she points out in the book pretty early on is that motherhood is actually an invention and it's a patriarchal invention, that it's been shaped and formed by men to kind of keep us in this place of caregiving. It was meant to be a village. We were meant to share this burden. And this idea of the at-home, stay-at-home mom is completely fictional. Don't have maternal instincts necessarily that are like better than anyone else would. That is a fictional. And so then she points out later in the book, again, this idea of language, that we need new words, like geriatric pregnancy. I can't remember some of the other examples she used, but they're also negative.
Yeah.
They're also against the female body, and you can tell that they've been created by older men, like these, and we, there's people who are doing the work of this, who are literally revolutionizing what it means to be a mother. And, she's not, she's one of them in writing this book, but there's other people doing that work. And when we think of it, like, we don't even have the language to discuss what becoming a mother is in our culture without it being inherently negative, like against us. So that really stood out to me too.
And one thing that I also find that is in our responsibility now, reading through this book and reading how, like you said, a lot of men have formed the perception or the narrative of how things should be. Just talking about birth, there's a whole section of how a man decided, oh, this is how the birth should be. And then it was like this for many, many years. And then someone else decided it should be different. And now that we have to claim that space back, and we as the birthing person and people in the community that is surrounded with this has to write their own narrative how we experience it, because no cis men will ever experience birth and will ever go through this. So they should take a back seat and really let the people who are going through this decide how should things be handled, how is the language going to be, how is the care going to be. Just talking about accessibility to pain relief, and there's this crazy history of, oh, it's not painful, it's your fault, or it should be painful because it's necessary. Like this whole other people telling you how this should be instead of I want this for me or I don't want this for me. And really claiming that responsibility and that choice back and that power back, and not letting anyone else who will never and can never experience it let shape the narrative around it.
And
that's basically what my biggest takeaway is. It's the patriarchy of motherhood. Like it's such an oxy, like more like this is so ridiculous. And one of the things I did want to quote, because I did find some highlights for some reason, they were there. The institution fostered the idea that women are born with a natural maternal instinct rather than needing to develop knowledge and skills as caregivers. And I mean, that was screaming at me, because it was a case of, oh yeah, you're naturally going to be able to breastfeed. And it was like, I don't know, like this isn't working. And like lactation consultants are out there to help people. Like we need this. This should be part of our care. It shouldn't be if you need it. It should be like, no. This should be part of it, because at the end of the day, we need to know how to change a diaper, to feed a baby, to like formula feed a baby. Like, how do I sterilize things? There should be classes on this. And it shouldn't be just when you're pregnant and going, oh, I need to do this now. It should be a case of, hey, home economics. You have to learn how to make an omelet when you're 13. And it's like, actually, boys and girls, we're actually going to also look at this as well. Like, let's look at how we care for kids. It was
like both, right? Both genders. Like,
exactly. Yeah. So it was, I think, and this is something we started talking about, and this is why we had to push the record button quickly. I found part of the book was getting me enraged on the whole idea of the patriarchy of motherhood, giving birth and pregnancy. And it was also the fact that there was also a quote somewhere about hysteria. Anything that a woman talked about nausea, anything that talked about like, I don't feel great or something like that, it was down to hysteria. And hysteria was translated from the dictionary about something about the womb, a movement, or there was a moving womb. Yep, and it was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. It was the womb used to float around our bodies, and that would cause us to go into hysterics.
And again, the thing is, without people like Madame Curie and, people like that, those are the only women we know in history, because everything else was always male dominant. And so we have words, and we have, as you say, how to give birth, all instructed by men throughout the centuries. And it's the fact that, as we all very much know, is the fact that even female research studies have only kind of come about since the 90s, since women were able to go to colleges and study things and say, this is what we want to know about. As Maren said, not about the eels who had to go 5,000 miles from the Baltic Sea over to Europe or whatever it was. And you're kind of like, yeah, great. So they're slimy and you can see through them. But then when they arrive here in Europe, they're kind of green. And it's like, great. Now tell me about my uterus. Yeah. It's so amazing, because like we're half the population, and much to the idea of like the reason like mental health is so, like the mental health illness basically is so prevalent in maternal women. And they estimate it was like 350 million women in the world. They estimated, I think it was. It's prevalent because there's no support. And the thing is, myself and Maren had discussed this as well previously about like the playground situation, where it was like,
I have it already open here. I'm ready to read.
I wanted to read that as well. So yeah.
But the thing is is like, it's all of these things that we're kind of like, oh, we get playgrounds and we get to go to school. School is set up because it's not to interfere with the parents who have to go back to work 9 to 5. This is me getting enraged. I hear my voice raising, my heart's beating. This is not who I am. This is never who I thought I would be.
But this is good because this is also what she talks about. We have to get ragey. We have to get that anger because we cannot suppress. Because if we suppress, then we're going to be the ones paying for it. And this is also her whole language of the book, is that all these feelings that you are going through and experiencing and that are rising, talking about this, when we as women talk about the experience and then we feel this anger, the button should not be then, but now I'm getting angry. Oh, let's like focus. Oh, how cute is this baby? Oh, no, like we have to really stick to that anger, but use it as constructive fuel, like use it to change something, to start the conversation, to bring the people who are responsible right now for things into the spot that they do the change, because we are, let's face it, not always in the positions, women, that we are in positions that we can do the change, but the people who are in charge need to be educated about this. They need to hear the rage, they need to hear the frustration, they need to feel the anger, because if they don't, then they think, well, everything's fine, right? Mm-hmm. So
I mean, there's also an added element to this, like let's have an addendum, is the fact that the three of us come from 3 different countries and we're living currently in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Who's going to listen to us here?
No, but I think that I was just going to say that I think that you guys are doing the work in a sense. The fact that this is a platform where we're now discussing this, and even if you have a small listenership compared to like something else, like we're a very niche market here, but that's that many more women, people hearing about what this concept is, hearing about this book, hearing about this rage, hearing about the patriarchy nature of motherhood, who are then going to maybe go talk to somebody else, like that trickle effect, right? So it's like this actually, again, like opening up the discussion, having people talking about it is doing something that will hopefully affect change. And I was going to point out, I wrote down to say, like, to the fact that we are here in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, she makes mention of the fact that the only country that has mother support is the Netherlands with the Kraamzorg. So the book actually calls out the Kraamzorg in it, and I think about that, like that learning how to be a mother, that like how much the Kraamzorgs have to teach you when you're a first-time parent. Here's how to change the diaper, here's how to give them a bath, don't clean their ears with this, like make sure the bottle is heated to the, like they, in that 8 days they're with you, they teach you so much, like beyond the caring for you and the checking your stitches and the cleaning the house. Like I can't imagine being in another country and having had this experience in another way. And the fact that we're the only country that gets it, just that blows my mind,
So, but there is a, like, this is slightly going off the topic, but there is a slight difference. If we give birth at home, is we will have our family and friends around us. And also we stay in hospital. Usually you tend not to give birth at home, and you're certainly not kicked out of hospital 3 hours after giving birth. And so you do stay there, and they do teach you and they educate you. The nurses there are wonderful. Maternal nurses in different countries are an exceptional group who do help and support new mothers in their spaces. And mothers can actually get the additional rest that they need in those hospitals as well. So I don't want to deter from that, but I do extremely applaud the Kraamzorg, because they come to your home, and what's better than resting in your own home and being able to have that, convalescence kind of feeling whilst being with your child, with your partner, with the rest of your family, if you have more children.
Yeah. And so Maren, you got it queued up. Do you want to read that quote about the playground, since we were
He's dying.
And I think this just sums it up. This is one example, and this just sums up the whole thing, how motherhood and our experience is viewed. So this is on page 133 on my copy, which is chapter 7, Motherhood and Society. So what do playgrounds say to women? They say, you know what? Just fuck you. You haven't anywhere to change your dirty diapers. Fuck you. Deal with it. You and your babies don't count enough for us to put in the plumbing. Are you going to sit for hours under the boiling sun? All right. Okay. Because you don't count. This work doesn't count. Mm-hmm. And I was just like putting this down and clapping. And I was like, fucking yes. And also, I love that she puts the words in, because we need the enragement. We need the anger. We need to express.
That's what I'm saying. This book does build you this enragement. I mean, in the Netherlands alone, I think one of the common complaints is usually there isn't actually enough public toilets here. And in Amsterdam, the fact that all the cafes and restaurants tend to be in quite narrow spaces, it's been hell trying to find somewhere to go with your buggy to go and change your child, you know. So there is this whole thing that we also suffer from here as well. But yes, it was, I think that resonates with anyone who has a child under the age of like even one. They're probably like, oh my God, yes. Why am I standing here and I have just arrived? My child's had a punami and now I'm having leaky, or I've had urinary incontinence. Now I have to go home and this is my day ruined.
And that says something too, because we have pretty good playgrounds here. You know, like there's so many of them. There's such good play structures. And yet we still feel the rage when we read that quote. Like we were still like, yeah, wait a second. Like these things aren't there for us. And like, why don't we think about this? And I underlined that as well to read. I'm going to also move us to our next question because I think it's like part of this. But my next question was like, what surprised you? Like, what did you learn that you weren't aware of before? And to give
eels and tadpoles.
To give you an example, because you brought up the like, you know, the punami, the like, we don't have a place for this. So one of the things that surprised me was still the obscenity of motherhood and childbirth, that like even now still on Instagram, they block images of like real childbirth. That is something that people shouldn't see. You can see people getting killed. You can see people in sex acts, but like, God forbid you see a head coming out of a vagina. And then it surprised me too, the Freedom Mom commercial that was banned from the Oscars. And I went and I Googled it. I YouTubed the commercial. It did air in some different country because there was like subtitles on it. And it was a great commercial. It was so honest about what postpartum looks like for a woman, getting up and like when you're like kind of crouching towards the toilet and you've got the giant diaper on. And it was a total advertisement for their products in a way that was like, yeah, you need all of these products like after you give birth. And what better way to show that than actually see what it looks like? And they weren't allowed to air it during the Oscars because it was too obscene, even though all the movies at the Oscars are war movies and again sex movies. And I just, again, this double standard of the sort of like Madonna whore thing, that like mothers are these like saintly things and our bodies are these temples, and how dare we see any of the reality. So that's something that surprised me. She
does even bring this whole thing in when she goes to the to a museum to look at mothers in pictures and how they're portrayed, and how she said that in I forgot the year, but there was a period in time where mothers were put under a blanket when the picture of the baby was
the Victorian, which I thought was such a great metaphor for motherhood, though, wasn't it? Like this idea. So for people who haven't read it, they say like in the Victorian era, the mother would put a blanket over her head and hold the baby up. So the baby was the only thing in the picture, and the mother was literally just a prop to hold the baby up. Like, what a metaphor to how we disappear. We disappear in service to our child. Like everything is a like we don't.
But then we can't disappear. Because if we disappear, then it's the worst thing.
They fall down.
So I've got a quote here as well. And it's like that a natural mother is a person without further identity, one who can find her chief gratification in being all day with small children. Mm-hmm. And like, that was the thing as well, like that I'm kind of like, yeah, this is who you are. This is you want to be a mom? Okay, this is who you are. And you're going to just do it. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be no question. There's going to be no complaints because no one else complains. So you're not allowed to complain. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a case of, oh no, it's because anyone who does complain is labeled a complainer or a moaner or
a bad mom.
Yeah, right? The guilt, the shame.
Like,
yeah. It's like, well, if you didn't want kids, like if you're complaining, why did you have them? And you're like, it's hard. It's fucking hard. I have one child, and like I've spoken to people with multiple children, and like I've seen like social media, like some people are like, I've got 5 kids, and people don't understand how I've got 5 kids. And it's like they entertain themselves and they make it like a joke. Yeah. And then there's other people who are kind of like, I didn't expect to have my 3rd one. It was a complete surprise. And now I've got 3. And like, you know, I love them all, but like, it's really hard. And they just keep going. And sometimes I wonder, do they allow themselves to feel, or do they block it off, compartmentalize, and just keep going to the point that they could burn out?
Mm-hmm. And I think that those parts for me, what spoke to me the most in the book, because that's what I'm feeling right now. This really, like, I was 41 years old when my child was born, or I turned 41 the week she was born. So you lived 40 years of your life as this identity, as like a thing that was just you. And then suddenly you just become a mother, which is why this word spoke so much to me, like learning what it is. And society has all these thoughts about, okay, mother means this. And you think that stuff just goes into your body and you're going to feel that, but you don't. You still feel like the 40 previous years or 20 or whenever you had a kid, I'm sure. And I kept having convinced myself, like, this is who I am now. Like, I am a mother now, and it's supposed to mean these things, and it's supposed to create these feelings. And they weren't necessarily coming, and they still aren't here. You know, I'm like 18 months into it. And I mean, like, I love my daughters, not, but it's just this idea of mother, this like heavy word that like sits on your shoulders. And I had my first experience. I went to a party, I don't know, we'll say a year ago, you know, let's say my daughter was 6 months old, and we brought her, we had to bring her. We didn't have a babysitter that night. And it was the first time I felt ignored in the way that I had ignored mothers before. You know, this idea of, you are just this thing. You are this person with a baby, and I don't have one, and I have no way to connect with you. And you are this only identity. You are mother. And therefore, people didn't talk to me. They literally would like look past me because I'm like holding my baby. Like, these were all childless couples, you know, like none of them. There was maybe like 2 couples at the whole party that engaged with my child and me in that reason, like, oh, well, let me talk to your child. That helps me talk to you. And I know I've treated people like that. Like, I know I like was in my, I don't want to, okay, yeah, what do we have in common? You know, like you kind of write it off. And it was so crazy to me because I'm like, I'm so many more things than just this one aspect of myself. But now this is who I am because I had a child. Like, this is what society tells you. This is who you are.
Yeah, I have a quote of that, which is, while I always wanted children, I realized with a jolt that I didn't hold mothers or the work that mothers do in high esteem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she talks about this. There's also a whole chapter of the ambivalence that we experience as mothers, this whole thing of what she love and hate and all that. And also about the mourning process. And this is something that I also had to go through. What you just said, it's like, I've been someone before I became a mother. And then all of a sudden it's expected of me, okay, full stop, chapter closed, door is closed, don't look back, no feelings attached to any of this anymore. Don't associate with your former self. Done. You're a mother now. Other feelings, other door. Those 2 lives cannot coexist. Mm-hmm. And she talks about this, like, how are we expected that we can't go through a mourning process of, oh, I've left my career, I've left this, and I want to remember that, and I want to honor that, and I want to go through this process of letting go and process of change, which includes denial, mourning, and all of that. And why are we expected to not have that? And then, I mean, I've had this discussion also with my husband when it came to daycare, which I thought, when I became a mother, I thought, well, this is going to be my new thing. And she's going to, I don't know, she's going to be with me a couple of years and eventually maybe daycare. But it was just not an option because I thought, why? Like, I'm there. Like, why? But then she went then finally when she was 15 months old. But I had started thinking about this when she was 10 months old, because for me, the hardest time was between 10 months and 18 months looking back. And I was like, oh God, I can't do it anymore. I can't. Like, it was just so, I felt so hostile. I was like, I cannot. It's all day. I need a break. And then it's like, but why? But she can't go to daycare. But why aren't you loving this? Why? And I didn't have the words. I was like, I don't know why. And I love her. Like, why do we have a child then if you don't want to take care of it? It's like, I do. Yeah. And I also want to take care of myself and about like, I'm still here. And that was this feeling. And the discussion was quickly shut down because I did not have the words. And I just had this weird feeling. I was like, no, it doesn't feel right, but I don't even know how to explain it. So it was just so weird. Eventually she went then to daycare, and now looking back, going through this whole process, but it is this, I'm also other things, and I also want to be other things. And I know that I can be a better mother if I'm also allowed to be other people, and I'm also allowed to fuel my tank outside the home with other recognition, with other work, with all of that I just don't get with the interaction when I'm just at home.
And that's
something most would.
She brings up rituals in the book. So like when you're saying, like, you had to mourn, we have to grieve the loss of our life before we became a mother, while at the same time celebrating the fact that we've become a mother. And she's saying there are no rituals for this, that the baby shower is the closest thing to a ritual for this transition. And it's like, looks so poorly on now because it just looked as a way that you like go and request. It's like, we did it. I was like, this is the only time I've ever gotten to celebrate me, and we're going to have an online baby shower because it was important to me. And now after reading the book, and you realize that's also the only ritual that we have in our, like, at least Western culture.
But that, does stem from the fact that that was back in the days where, like, you tend to be like married and you're probably like a teenager or in your early 20s, you have nothing. And it's a case of this is people gifting you, like, which is essentially what we do, is like we give things away, which that's what the baby shower was back in those days, where it was like, this is what I have for my 4 kids. Now here it is for you. And that was just the way that the baby shower came. Obviously, through commercialization and everything else, it did change a bit. But the thing
else,
but and I think she also went in to talk about the Solomon Islands, where she said it was a case of, it's not about the birth. Here's the baby. It's like, here is the mother.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
And I was just like,
they got a new name. They got, like, I don't know if it was the same Solomon Islands or somebody else, but she said there's a culture where the mother literally gets a new name given to her when she becomes a mother. There needs to be a joyful celebration, and some people now are doing the binding when you bind your belly. It's not very common, so like I didn't have it done, but like
you can always have it done, by the way. I did inquest.
But like when we talk about the reinvention of the words, like when we talk about that this is a political issue, and she ends the book with it kind of building up to a political issue, she starts listing all these people who are trying to make changes and revolutionize it. So it's like the whole book is kind of like, here's all this maternal health issues, and then here's some things that we could do if we revolutionize and change. And I think for me, that would be creating rituals, creating positive rituals where people are allowed to know that you're going to mourn, you need some rest, you're going to also have joy, like and I don't know what that looks like,
One thing I do love, and it was actually something I was trying to figure out how to even set up for our community here, is I really love the nesting ritual where friends get together and they help clean a house, they cook the food for the people. To me, that would mean a lot for us mothers. Like, imagine any of us where a couple of women come over, some of them bring food over, some of them help your laundry or just set up your baby, give you guidance. Maybe they've had their baby already, or, whatever it might be. The fact that you kind of feel like you're kind of not a cult, but you're kind of coming into this group and you're starting this while you're pregnant, and they're kind of saying, this is what it's going to be. Like, it's kind of like, this is the introduction to your village. And it's going to be that thing of, this is the starting of your embrace into what it is. And we want you to come in rested, peaceful, and ready for this. But it's very hard for us. It's really hard for us here because we're all very different. We all come from different cultural backgrounds. We live all around the city and even the country of the Netherlands. And, there's the upheaval of how long are we staying here for? How much investment do I have to do? Is my mother going to come over? You have all of this kind of things playing in your mind. But to me, the nesting thing, I think, would be the most significant thing to start this process of finding these rituals for us as mothers. So it'd be like the nesting. Home birthing and Kramzorg is always magic. Things like the postpartum massages, the belly binding, the closing of the bones. All this kind of thing is actually so magical. And I only found it out after I had gone through everything. And I felt like that's what I kind of needed. I needed that. I think it was an embrace by other women who've been through it. I think that's what I needed. I didn't need a book, and I didn't need people to go, congratulations, or a bottle of champagne, and hey, great, I'm breastfeeding for a year, so there's no plans of having this anyway. But I wanted that embrace of another mother kind of saying, I'm trying to think of it's tough, or, welcome to it, or, this is it, you're in this and we're all in this together and we've all been there before you. And it's like this wisdom thing that people who've been there before you, they're going to be there for you. And it's like that bird who wraps their feathers around their chicklings to kind of say, this is it, and you're coming into our brood, as it were.
Mm-hmm. I do have to say, though, that reading this and also this aspect of community, where she talks about how we kind of are all in our own individual processes, but don't talk so much about it. And she says how she comes into this meeting and then everyone's like, oh yeah, it's fine. And like the baby's fine and this is fine, but no one really talks about their experience. And I have to say that looking back on this first period, I was so grateful that we had our little WhatsApp group where I felt the discussions were different. I really felt like in our group and then with individuals, like Eva and we talk pretty openly about things. And also another friend of ours who is in our like triangle of sadness. No. But I felt how important that was looking back now that I did have this group of women where it wasn't just fine, like, oh yeah, sleep is fine, this is fine. But it was really like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I'm super like this and that. And we were very bluntly, and you have to find those people who you can be very open and bluntly with, and know that there's no judgment, but there's just, I felt like it was more of like sharing, like,
vulnerable.
This is happening. Yeah, like, okay. Like, and I didn't even need advice or anything. I just needed an ear. I just needed a nod. I'm like, oh yeah, thanks for saying this. Oh, you also have that. So that really is so, so important that you find those people who you can be brutally honest with. And sometimes you just need to get it out. You don't need anything else, but you need that safe space that you know this person is going to hold it for you to heal, and vice versa. And I'm so grateful for that. I found this within our group. And now I found this also with Eva. And I hope that we can create this with this podcast, that it's okay to say these words. It's okay to feel these feelings. It's totally normal to go through this process, and it's not your fault. And you're not alone with it.
Just to add though, we also had some, and I think anyone else would probably go, what the hell? We shared small wins. And there was a wonderful girl in our group who shared herself on the toilet with her baby in a sling. And I mean, if you sent that to anyone else, they'd be like, what the hell? But it was the fact that for us, we all saw it. Some of us wished like, I can't wait to do that. Other of us were like, yes, go girl. But that as well was just something that like, look at me. And the fact that you can't send it to someone else, but you could send it to us, we were like, we could cheer you on, thankfully on WhatsApp.
Yeah. And that's what I said. I think that the key part of that is that the non-judgmental piece, right? That you guys are willing to hear these things. Because I do think that still can be really hard to find. Like even some of the moms groups I'd go to here, it wasn't that people were judgmental, but it was very much like, oh, I loved holding my baby and breastfeeding this and that. And that's great. That was their experience. But like, and this goes back to what you said in the beginning, that there's no research done on women. I had pain in my breasts for 6 weeks and I went to the GP. I had 2 lactation consultants. Nobody could diagnose what was causing it. It never turned into mastitis. We assume it was a clogged duct, but like what clogged duct lasts for 6 weeks and doesn't turn into mastitis? And it finally just, I had a lactation consultant help me with it to a point where something happened. It went away. But for 6 weeks of my baby's life, breastfeeding was horribly painful. She constantly wanted to feed. So then that created issues between me and my baby because I am in so much pain. And so it's not that these women were judging me, but I remember feeling not comfortable in that conversation because I couldn't say in that space, actually breastfeeding was horrible for me. It was such a like, isn't it wonderful? And so it's like, we also as women have to create that, like, whatever that way of being open to all conversations and making everyone feel like it's okay for them to share their stories and be lucky enough to find those people who will do that with you. Because when you read this book, you can tell this author did not find that. Like she necessarily did not have these people where she felt comfortable talking to, so.
On that thing, there is like one group that comes to my mind. There's a WhatsApp group here in the Netherlands and it's called Pumping Queens. And it's someone was like, yes, it's a fucking hard journey. And okay, we can't breastfeed like physically, or I don't want to, or whatever it might be. And they created a WhatsApp group because they wanted that, because exactly what you say, I can be in a group with everyone else who's had a baby around the same time, but I can't be that vulnerable because you don't know what I'm going through. So other people are creating their communities, which I think is what's the most empowering part.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah.
One thing that also comes to mind when you were just talking there about your experience in this group where everyone was raving about how great breastfeeding is. And I think what we should start also doing is listening to the ones who are silent, who are not joining the conversation, because then clearly we know they're going through something else and they have not maybe the space or they feel guilty or they can't speak up. So listening to the ones who are not saying anything, I think is the most important part, because these women need to be heard and they need to be invited and they need to be consoled after, maybe like, hey, I didn't hear so much from you today. Are you okay? Like just checking in with the people who are not speaking up or who are not so courageous and want to share their whole big story in front of everyone or so. Like really check in with the people who are, because we're made silent and we need to break the silence. So we need to be like paying attention to the silence and encourage whoever is silent to speak up, because they are going through a process. They are going through an experience and they are silent for a reason. So we have to break that cycle.
Yeah, there's a quote here that was that's constantly in my mind because I talked about WhatsApp, and it's 21st century parenting norms, which have become more and more intensive, child-centered and demanding than they have ever before. And it was like, yes, but like, as I said, like I applaud the WhatsApp groups, we've had Facebook groups, whatever. They are developing into different things. But as to what you said, Maren, it was a case of, yes, like you can check in with people, but sometimes we are so stuck in where we are. We don't even have the energy to think of someone else. And we really have to focus on ourselves. And that could be really hard because then the other people can feel very isolated. But we don't know each other's journeys. We don't know what day you're having. Maybe you've been up since 2 this morning. I mean, this is the hardest part of mothering. And again, it goes to the whole vulnerability aspect. I said it before, like I've gone on this Brene Brown for some reason on parallel with the Matrescence book. And it's just that thing of like, it's a chain that we go through. And it's just a case of if someone gives you good, give them good. If someone gives you bad, drop the bad and move on with your good, you know, because some cycles just have to be broken. And if you're having a bad day, I mean, you are not alone. And that's, I think we always say this actually in the podcast is you're not alone. We're in a very small village in Amsterdam or somewhere else in the Netherlands. You're always connected. There's always people out there. There's some amazing people out setting up events. You know, I mean, Mama Social is always spoken about because she's providing a space for moms to go with their children. Because I mean, God, you have your child, like Maren said, like, oh, I just want to be with my kid all the time for the first few years. And then it's a case of, oh, I have to wait 16 years to get on the daycare list. You're kind of like, well, what am I going to do with my child? And, you know, at least you now have somewhere to go with your child, not just constantly going to the library where you feel, again, stuck going, there's none of my native language books here. It's only Dutch, you know, You're constantly feeling like, I feel like there's an extra element as well for us when it comes to this book. There's an element as well of being an international family in the Netherlands is we also have an extra kind of barrier in a way to us that we're kind of like, oh, we don't fit in as well. Like we don't know where's the accessibility. We don't know the groups we can go to. We weren't growing up here with our friends who have kids with ages. Some of us are just placed here with our partner and we're like, here's 4 years, you know, enjoy it. You know, and you're like, oh, okay. What am I meant to do here? How much investment am I meant to do?
I mean, I'll definitely say like the mama hangs that like saved me, you know, like knowing that I just like every Monday, I at least know I have somewhere to go and talk to other kids. And I think there are a lot of people opening up really good stuff here right now, which I don't know if that's happening in other cities. I mean, obviously we're aware of it because this is where we live and it's in our face, but you know, like I hope this is happening city by city, that like these women are standing up and empowering themselves to start these businesses for mothers and children, because if they, like, you know, because you find out about the spelling loop here. And I went to the first one, you know, when my daughter was 16 months old, and it's all in Dutch, but it's essentially a lot of people are like selling this to expats now, you know, like you can go to the similar things, but you pay for it. Whereas the spelling loop is free. And it's like, even that, like, because I'm not Dutch, that barrier of like, oh, I gotta get there and they're going to all be speaking Dutch, but I can do it. And it took me an entire year to get to one, you know, because I was so scared of it. Like I'd rather pay the money kind of knowing I'm going into like an English speaking thing. But now that I've done it once, I'm like, oh no, this is great. I'm coming back. But you have that fear as an expat too, of like, where am I? What spaces am I allowed into? Like, where will I be accepted? Like, is this going to be too difficult? And so we've had to create them. A lot of these women are creating these spaces because they didn't exist. And I think that that's really great. I was going to like go into one of my other questions was, do you think there's anything lacking in this book? Like, was there something as you read it that you like had expected more from?
I think because it was based in the UK, it was a case of like, there was a lot of, okay, this is one person's point of view. And it was a case of opening up. And to me, I think it was more of an introduction to languages and to a lot more research, various research. And as Maren says, like all the research money is being funded into like eels and everything else that goes along with it. I guess
sure the eel people are like, we get no money. How dare you?
That was that one study for 20 years and it was done by this one guy who basically lived on the bread line. I don't know what I mean, to be honest, like I found out about this book, I think at the beginning, like the middle part of, beginning of this year or so. And I kind of heard about it and it was great. And like, she actually came to the Netherlands, I think it was in May, and she did an event here. And I didn't know about it until after the event. And it was that thing of like, oh, okay, let me pick up the book and browse it. I didn't know what to expect because I just kind of was like, I'm just going to go into it openly because I don't think you can put everything into one book. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, that it's a case of like, that's why we need to read different books, because they're going to give us different languages and different angles and different aspects. Because at the end of the day, like, we're not a superhero that we go in, we change a uniform and now we're a mother kind of thing. It's like a book can't just be everything either. And it's just like, okay, this is just another building block on our journey in Matrescence. Like, this is just another aspect to give us that and to maybe even entice us and to kind of cause more of a hunger to go, I kind of want to go down this aspect, like me and my political rage and the patriarchy of life and everything else. I mean, I think it gives you kind of more of a taste to kind of go like, here is a million reasons to kind of fight for your future. Because when we're giving birth to, for example, our daughters, when they're growing inside us, we're growing also our grandchildren.
Yeah.
And it's also that thing that you're kind of like, oh, now I got to put my ass in gear because we don't know what the future is going to hold. So now it's a case of, okay, let me get this mama bear and let me get this. And so now I need to do a bit more work because this book isn't just handed to you and going, here it is, just read it A to Z and you're going to know how to fix the world. It's like, no, you got to put in a bit of your effort now. And you're then going to make the next step and the next step. And then you're contributing to this hopefully changing landscape for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this is also what, when you say what I felt was missing, I don't think anything was missing. I just had to understand that this is not a here's the problem, here's the solution book.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more like this is the process and the solution is another book. Or
Yeah.
So this is one thing that I had to like remove myself from, because usually when you read these books, like here's the problem, and here is my solution to it because I know best.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case here. It was just here's the problem and here's research and here's what other people say about this process. But if you come to look for solutions to all these processes, then that's not necessarily the right book. But like as Eva said, there's many points that you can then tap into and then can find the solutions elsewhere. I wished it was a little more also focused. Well, I wish and I don't wish, because I love that it's only about the mother experience and the Matrescence, but maybe there could have been a little more like how the fathers and how that whole relationship, like the relationship aspect of if I'm going through this process, and a little bit more how can I maybe then communicate this, or like, so that was a little bit left open for me, but I wouldn't point it as like it's missing. It can exist.
Parts of it were included. Like she did talk about the science of like the bond between father and child in the first year. Like there was certain elements, but I agree. But I do think that is, again, that's a whole psychological thing that you can then go down to kind of go, hey, that's missing. So let me look through that. And to be honest, there's probably not a book about it. So.
Well, and I was going to say, so I thought that this book would pair well with Crib Sheet by Emily Oster, because there was parts of me, because I went into it thinking it was a book about how we change as mothers, and it is, but it's through her lens of her experience. And so sometimes I kind of thought there was going to be more parts that were like, and then this happens to your body, and that is in there, but I was expecting it heightened. And I think that Crib Sheet does that. Like she's like, here's the research about, here are the things that affects you. And you're like, okay, well, I don't need this book to then be that, because this other book exists. So once I let go of that, I was able to enjoy it more of like, she's really going through the lens of like how she experienced her matrescence. And then here's the research she did to sort of kind of explore these topics through her lens and get into these kind of granular biological things.
Again, though, to note for that is a case of there's a lot of gathering of different kind of data that she culminates to actually provide that. Whereas with Lucy Jones, she's actually providing such very specific ones to tackle specific topics, which is what made me more comforted in this. Yeah. She's not trying to be like, here's the facts. It's like, here's what's out there, you know? I'm not trying to put them all together and make one assumption. It's like, no, this is it.
And it's what I also find interesting about discussing this topic, and like you said, about fathers. So it's a book about motherhood. So it's a book about becoming a mother. And yet, even when we were talking earlier about rituals, I'm like, what about non-mothers? Like, what about the people who haven't become a mother? And it's like, well, the book doesn't have to cover them because it is about becoming a mother. But I did think about, like, one of the things that surprised me too that I didn't bring up earlier is she brought up the microchimerism. I don't know if I say that word.
Chimerism.
Yeah, when you grow a human in your body, there's literally parts of their cells left in your body for potentially the rest of your life. So much so that your younger sibling, like the younger siblings of that baby, have cells from the older siblings. That was like crazy. And then that's a very specific piece of research that, like, why do, like, you know, like this is just the stuff that we're not discussing, that we don't know about what giving birth is. But it made me think about people who have either chosen to have an abortion or have had a miscarriage, who are not mothers, who feel like they don't get to say that they are mothers because they don't have a child, but their bodies also went through all of these changes. They still had the cells of their children inside of them, whether they have a child or not. Their bodies changed to start growing a placenta, whether they kept the baby or not, you know, like choice or no choice. Like, and I think too that that's also a part of these conversations that's not necessarily in this book, but like, how, because, you know, my path, it took me 3 years to have my baby. I had infertility issues or fertility issues, I guess I could say. And there was very much like when those Mother's Days rolled around and people would make those posts that like even if you don't have a baby yet, but you're trying, you can still celebrate Mother's Day. There's like these weird, you know, like, and I just think about it a lot because there's so many women out there too who wanted to have a baby and just couldn't for however many reasons. And they don't have that feeling of matrescence, of getting to like discuss these things. And so I thought so something that's not present, or maybe it's something for another book, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that'll probably be then down to another book. I mean, as you say, like people who have to adopt or, you know, who choose to go that path or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, they will go through matrescence, even though they don't physically go through it. There will be this whole thing because at the end of the day, you are becoming a mother and you are changing your brain functions, your cognition. You're going to go through everything else that we've all gone through as well. The sleepless nights, the caring, the overwhelm and everything else. So yeah, I think that'll be down to another research, I think, for someone else to be doing at this stage.
Yeah. I just wanted to go through my notes to see if there's anything like really big, but my last question that I was going to ask was just like personal, like what were your guys' experience of matrescence? But like that feels like a really big topic. So maybe in like a word, like thus far, your experience of matrescence, 1 or 2 words. What do you think?
Ground shaking. Really like ground shaking, and yeah, shook to the core. I felt like I was completely shattered and reorganized and not knowing that was happening. And I just saw the shattering. Like I felt like the body falling apart. Literally my hair. I think just falling apart. There was no point in me was like snapped or like was tight. Everything felt like was falling apart. Like that's it, my body and then my brain. And I remember even saying, like, I thought I said this to my therapist. I said, I think I'm getting dumber. Like I think and she said, there's no such thing as losing IQ. Like you can't get dumber. Like I was like, I'm sure it's happening. I can't experience it. I'm like losing it.
Yeah, she actually points out that that's part of this matrescence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Literally change. They change for the rest of our life. And she says that it actually makes us younger, which I found that was the first time I'd heard that. I was
like,
oh, great.
So yeah, like if I have to say, it was really ground shaking, but then putting it back together and looking on it now with this word, like I really cannot say this enough, discovering this process and discovering the words for it and discovering the process of matrescence or matrescence, linking it to adulthood and adolescence, just put everything into place. It just made click, and I could be so much more gentle and forgive myself and going with so much more compassion towards like my future and knowing that this is the process, and just gave me so much peace. So after this whole wrecking ball, I feel peace now that I know I'm right, like how I am, and I'm on the right path, and this is my journey, and this is my metamorphosis as what am I going to become? I don't know. Is it ever going to ending?
Yeah. Eva, what about you?
I think the only word I can really come up with is novice. If anything, it's been a humbling experience because it really makes me feel like I know nothing. First off, like anyone is going to feel that like that. You know nothing and you have to start brand new. Like everyone talks about that parent book and I didn't get that parent book. Ha ha ha. But it's like, oh my God, I have to fucking write this book myself, which is what Lucy Jones actually did herself. And it's a case of like, I have to read the signs. How does my baby like, oh, a close hand means a baby's, hungry, or, there's a lot of this thing. And I think it's just a case of, it's a very humbling experience to have to actually learn how to raise another child. And what Maren also said was, my daughter is like going to be 4 soon. And it's a case of I'm now still having to learn how to be compassionate and self-caring for myself. I'm still struggling with this. Because in 4 years, I've had no off time, as it were. There is no sleep-ins. There is, every morning is like daycare or it's whatever. And soon it's going to be school 5 days a week, And it's that thing of like the importance of self-care is actually paramount. And it's taken 4 years. And I mean, this sounds so mad, but it's just, I've never been able to put myself first. And now it's a case of, it's actually one of the most things I'm going to have to learn to do. And it doesn't make me a bad mother. It will actually, like Maren said previously, it's a case of you have to fill your cup up as well. Like there's going to be things you're going to have to do for yourself. And this is like one of the, like, I'm just constantly learning. Like like even now 4 years in, I'm still a novice because my daughter is constantly changing. There's constant changes with her. There's changes in my relationship with my husband. There's changes in my brain. My therapist thinks God knows what's happening in the last few years with me, but I'm constantly in the novice stage. I don't even feel like I've accomplished anything because I constantly am having to take on the next thing and the next thing. And God knows Google and DuckDuckGo and YouTube and damn parenting podcasts. Like myself and Maren were like, who do we need to talk to about what? And it's kind of like, well, I'm having trouble with this. Right. Let's find someone. It's one of those things that it's just constantly like, there's always going to be something to learn. And if it's not now, it could be later. And if it's not later, it's going to be in the future. And it's also going to be now and later. So it's just a continuous.
I think it's interesting because, like you said, you have one child. And so you're never going to have that having a 4-year-old experience again, right? Like your child is always going to, so you are always learning the next thing. There isn't like, I got this now when you have the one kid. Not that, when you have multiple kids, it's still a new experience too. But also my friend's metaphor, and I might have shared this on one of our previous podcasts, but it's like a video game. And every single time you think you've got it, it levels up, and then it levels up. And so it's like, you're like, yeah. Like, I know how to do this thing. We're like breezing along and they have a growth spurt and like a mental cognitive development. And you're like, never mind, like, new level. Like, and I just think it's such a perfect metaphor because, it's like we're all dealing with the baby toddler stage, but soon we're going to have the teenage stage and then the young adult stage. And then like now we're the old people and they're taking care of us stage, like that, and it's always going to be new. It's gonna
it's always going to be new, and it's very humbling. No matter what you think you can do or what you can do, I think no matter what happens is when you think I got this, you ain't got this, because you know what, in 2 minutes that's going to change.
Exactly. And I would say, so for my word, I would say probably loss and growth, just because like I was saying that Victorian metaphor she uses in the book really spoke to me, just this idea that you really do disappear behind this new identity. And so having to deal with the loss of whatever my old identity was. And for me, that's tied with things like I moved here without a job. And so it's like, it's combined, like, who are you anymore when you don't have that identity to fall on, and now you're just mother, So, but then the growth of getting to see her like becoming this little human, is just amazing. So it's a loss and a benefit, but it's dealing with them at the same time that you mentally are trying to figure out. And I will say, before we started recording, we mentioned how some of the sections made us cry.
Oh yes.
And one of the moments I cried was when she was having that like total breakdown with her like child. Was like they were in the store and like nothing was going right, and this woman comes over and asks if she's okay, and she's expecting one of those moments where the people like give you advice, and she just leans down and ties her shoes for her. Like the old woman ties her shoes, and I was like crying because it's like, again, it's like, I don't know, it's just this idea of like, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for this village, this community that's just going to let us know like we're seen and we need help and we need support. And I don't know, like it was like a beautiful, and I think like that woman must have been a mother at one point, like to know like this lady just needs help and she just needs her shoes tied. Like,
but yeah. One point that I found very remarkable was when like core revelations or core moments in this book was, for me, it was one moment when she was talking about, she was in the ocean, she was taking this little break, and then she talks about how she went underwater and there she was like not available. And I have created this in my life. So, I mean, maybe not everyone knows this about me, but I love spinning. So I'm like obsessed with it so much that I became an instructor myself this year. And I've talked about spinning, how much I love it and how much it has transformed me. And then that really, reading that sentence really struck with me, because this is how I also disappeared. When I go into the spinning class, the door shuts. I never leave my phone. Like you're not allowed to take your phone in there. I never left it at the reception. It's locked into the locker. And I knew that for 45 minutes, nothing else other than me on that bike exists. And that's it. The only person that's responsible for the next 45 minutes is me. Focus on me. I'm responsible for the right, like that, just like, because I couldn't even put it in words, like what do I like so much about it, like the music, blah, 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 blah. But that was the feeling, that feeling of I am not available. I'm just with me for 45 minutes. And that really creating those spaces and not feeling guilty about it. Thoughts and emotions that you're suppressing the whole time then can surface, but that's then the time where I started then working with it and learning about them and all that. So this is really, that was the thing where I realized, yes, I needed that. I took it, and I will continue to take that time.
And speaking of time, I think this has been one of our longest episodes. And I mean, in fairness, we could still keep going and go chapter by chapter, because this book really is going to resonate. One chapter might stick out more to some, all of it could do it. I mean, you spoke about crying because of the shoe tying. I mean, I was crying in chapter 1, I think it was. It's going to affect everyone in different ways. It's highly recommended. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the Obey app when I did check. But I mean, you know, you can always go in and request it if possible. I mean, I've done that myself. Can we get a out of 5 rating? Because, you know, we usually try and, you know, the Goodreads is always the one I check. And because we've got Mrs. Good here as well. So I'm just figuring, what would you give it out of 5?
I think 4.5 for me. Like, I did think it was a beautiful book. Just the way she wrote it, the addition she put in, the research and the lens. But it just wasn't a 5, but I think it was close enough.
And Maren?
Yeah. I would also, for the points that I said, that you have to take it under these 2 lenses, where the country she's in and also her extreme experience at one point, I would also say 4.5. But then I feel a little guilty because it's so important. And I still think it's an amazing book and I don't have anything to compare to. So I still would give it a 5 just because I have to give it a 5.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the lens there of like, as well, of like, I think it's just a 5 because at the end of the day, we need more of these books. We need more people's stories. We need to hear their truths. There's nothing wrong with anyone's story. And the thing is, it's just about reading because at the end of the day, that's what all the books are about, right? So shout out to Lucy Jones. Thank you so much for writing this. I know it came out last year, but really we only found out about it a little too late. But I think this is also a great timing for anyone who is pregnant, or it's a great book to give to anyone. Especially people who don't even like to read. It's actually quite intriguing, and, you know, just tell them to get over the whole tadpole and the mucus and all that kind of stuff. It gets a little weird, but I mean, it does build up to something as it is. So this has been the first episode of our Matrescence month. We have another couple of episodes coming up, which is things like talking to someone who's 6 months postpartum, which is postpartum doula Harriet. We also have Dr. Naomi coming in as our resident psychologist, as always, to help us talk about matrescence. And we have Elena Stranding as well lined up to continue the conversation in which we spoke to her back in April. This is a very important topic for all of us. Maren has really lit up about this topic and wants to do anything and everything there is. We are looking to talk to as many people as we can. We really want to have more involvement in this. We want to have more conversations. And if you have any suggestions, if you have any comments, please send us a message on Instagram. You can also email us. But what's most important is you share this episode, because as Elizabeth said, she'd never heard about this until I said it. Maren hadn't heard about it until Elena said it. And at the end of the day, this is what this episode is about. And the whole month actually is about. Share this, get this word out, get this book out, go buy it, gift it. If you know anyone who's pregnant, or if you're pregnant, or even, you know, even if it's going to be a gift, even for your sister or your mom, it's always going to be paramount and could touch someone somewhere. And the thing is, like, Elena had a great story back in April where she spoke about coming back from a client, and she was buying flowers from a woman, and the woman had like 40-year-old children or something. She was like, oh, thank God there's someone like you. Like, there was this whole thing. And I was like, I mean, I remember reaching for the tissues because it was a whole thing of embracing and acknowledging what we go through. And it's the fact that, like, this book is like giving the stories and the words and the language. And there's so many people out there who've done this work, but they're not known. They're in books and bookshops, but we don't know about them. They're not on the websites. They're not in the thesaurus. They're not in the dictionary. So it's been really hard. And so people like Lucy Jones is out there nitpicking them and putting them into one book to really help us build it. And so do share this. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube, and we're probably anywhere else. This is usually Maren's bit. I don't know why I'm doing this.
I'm amazed at your new process here. I'm like, oh, right, when am I supposed to tell you? Like, usually this is my part, but
now this is your part.
So remember, if you want to support us, please make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Drop us a line on Instagram, Damn Parenting Podcast. Give us a follow. Recommend us to your other friends and people in need who need to hear about this and need to hear that they're not alone. We're coming out every Wednesday with an expert episode and most Mondays, but going forward, we have to see if we can keep the damn chats every Monday. But for now, we have episodes every Wednesday, but we have a vast library of episodes, over 60. If you go into your Spotify, you can listen to the next hours and days to our voices and our info that we're putting out there. And yeah, I wanted to end this also like this book is really good at any time that you read it, if you prepare for it, but equally, as Eva said, it's also to heal maybe your experience and looking back. So it's always a valuable gift to anyone, even if you have, your mother-in-law or your own mother. Like I think it's never too late to read this book and to understand and to, heal a part of you, and maybe also then understand what you are going through. So this has been such an amazing chat. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming on again. And then we will hear you on the next episode. Make sure you share and like this episode, download it, spread the word, and we will hear you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.